turn my indicator off, you muppet. G'day guys, Chronicles of Solid here, and today I've decided to do another review, and this time on the Yamaha Tenere 660Z, or Tenere, however you want to pronounce it. I'm going to call it the Tenere. So initial specs are it's a 660cc single cylinder. Obviously it's kind of balancing that act between dual sport and adventure bike. Yeah, it's a 5-speed 21-inch spoked front wheel down here, which is great for off-road stuff. Yeah, that's about the basic specs. I think it makes 48 horsepower and about 58 newton meters of torque. And one of the things I really like about the Tenere is this thing here, the big fuel tank. It's about 23 litres, I believe, and that is good for about 500 kilometers on the conservative end. So with motorcycles these days, they all seem to come out with half-litre petrol tanks. You can't get further than down the street, so it's nice to be on a bike with a big petrol tank. Overall, it looks pretty good for a single cylinder. Probably one of the best. The only single I think that probably outdoes it look-wise would be the 690 Enduro by KTM, and that's a different kind of end of the spectrum. So this is probably the best looking single cylinder adventure toury kind of bike on the market, in my opinion. So that's probably enough of me gas bagging and you having a look at it. One thing I don't like is the twin pipes down here. That's just, to me, who I like to ride off-road quite a bit, that's just weight that I don't need. I'd probably get it down to a single pipe, which is probably on the aftermarket catalogue. Anyway, let's get on the bike and see how she goes. Well, one of the first things you notice when you hop on this is it's a very tall bike. Now I have a BMW F700 GS, that's quite a low bike, but I also own a WR250R, which is a very tall bike. This is probably somewhere in the middle, but because of the wider seat, obviously for comfort, because it's more towards a touring angle, makes it quite difficult to get your feet on the ground. For reference, I'm 180 centimeters tall, about a 32-inch inseam, so if you're a little bit taller it probably won't be a problem. If you're a little bit shorter, you might have some issues. The screen's quite nice, protects you from the wind not too bad. It's kind of hitting me just at the top of my helmet, which isn't too bad. It's a very easy engine to get along with. Be very hard to stall. I think it's quite, you can just take off at barely any RPMs and it just chugs along. It's quite a nice little engine. What I'll do is I'll probably compare this, or I've got to compare it to the bikes that I've ridden previously, and I think the one that it probably sits closest next to, some of you may disagree, but I think it's quite close in design kind of to the KLR 650. Now let me explain myself before you start flaming me. Obviously the KLR 650 is on the budget end of that dual sport kind of adventure touring category, and this is at the premium end. I mean, I think it's $4,000 or $5,000 more, so you got to consider that it is expensive for a single cylinder dual sport, but it is very well engineered. I mean, you've got all the fruit. I believe they come in an ABS model as well. I'm not sure if this one is actually ABS. It's a bit naughty of me, I should have asked before taking off. But the suspension is really nice on the road. It doesn't feel pudgy at all compared to the KLR, which is noticeably soft and probably the KLR's weakest link. This has got quite nice suspension. I would presume once you start taking this off-road, and with the weight of the bike, which I believe is about 215 kilos wet, so it's quite a hefty bike. It's heavier than the KLR, but I think it's a little bit lighter than my F700 GS, so take that into account. Yeah, so it's a very well designed bike. It's probably the nicest looking of the bunch, and what I mean by the bunch is you've got the BMW GS 650 GS Surtau, KLR 650. You might even go down to the DR 650, but you'd need to mod it quite a bit to be in this kind of venture touring category. Now it does have spoked wheels, a 21-inch front, so that is proper off-roading front wheel. And on the rides, I've gone in the dirt with the WR all the time, and on quite a few of the rides there's been dudes on Tenere 660s and even the 1200, come to think of it, but there's been a few on the 660 and they've gone everywhere. I've gone on the WR. It is kind of, in my mind, it fits in that one bike category. If you needed one bike to do everything, if you couldn't afford to or couldn't justify owning two separate bikes, say like a Litre 250cc or 450 for the trails and then a more road orientated bike, this is a great compromise. And that's what I mean by comparing it to the KLR 650, is that kind of do everything okay but nothing perfectly kind of bike, the Swiss Army approach to motorcycling. And you hardly have to think at all riding this bike. Once you're moving along, the weight isn't noticeable at all. When you're coming to a standstill, the weight is a bit noticeable, but that's just due to you being on, due to myself being on my tippy toes, so you do tend to feel it. Very maneuverable once you're going along. I suspect to be quite nice in the twisties. Obviously the limitations of the long travel suspension and the 21-inch front, but considering that, it's quite nice, quite flickable, very stable, feels very planted. Okay, so let's see how she goes at speed, shall we? For a 660 single, that certainly moves along quite nicely. Yeah, I'm quite surprised at the engine. Much more power than the 650 KLR, but obviously that's no surprise. Yeah, quite impressed with how quick that moves along. You certainly know it's a single though. It does kind of peter out at the top of the rev range, but it's got plenty of torque down low. The seat's already getting uncomfortable though, so I'd definitely change that out the box or get a air hawk or something. Yeah, very nice up to 80. And I can definitely confirm that that's a 5-speed. It's not too vibey for a single. And it's not the smoothest single I've ridden by a long shot, but it's not terrible. It's not going to be killing you on long distances, but you definitely know it's a single, if that makes sense at all. Moves along quite well for a single cylinder thumper. I do keep looking for 6th gear though, but that's only because both my bikes have 6 gears, so you probably get used to that pretty quickly. And the whole argument between what's better, 6 or 5 speed, well, I prefer a 6 speed if I had the choice. But in saying that, a well ratioed 5 speed is just as good, really. Moves along at the twist of a wrist. I'm sitting at 80 in top gear, and twist the wrist and you move along, which is nice. Very good turning circle. Kickstand's a bit of a bitch to get down sometimes. Brakes are pretty good. They're about the same as my F700 GS. The back brake isn't too bitey. The front is, yeah, about the same as the F700 GS. Not amazing, but not crap. Better than most dual sports. Screen's quite good. It gives me wind coverage up to the top of my helmet. I'm 180 centimeters tall. Now, there are a couple of problems that I've read about with this, and the first is hiding down in here. The cush drive, which is basically a kind of rubber that sits in here and just stops the harshness of the engine with the wheel. They tend to burn through cush drives quite quickly. And quickly, I mean, I've read from anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 kilometers, sometimes a little earlier. So that's something to be aware of. The other complaint I've heard is just basically for those guys who like to go real off-road with these things, and the suspension can get a bit spongy, but it is over 200 kilos, so what do you expect? I'm sure with some tuning or some suspension upgrades it'll be fine. It is very capable. I've seen guys ride it places I would never think to take one of these myself. I just don't have the confidence. It's a very easy bike to get along with. The engine, just you can take off without fear of stalling, so if you're a new rider or you're looking for your first big bike or something, it's quite easy to get along with. The biggest limitation it's going to have for a new rider is the seat height, I think. If I had to have just one motorcycle, this would get a very close look, I think. It just feels like a very tight, very well sprung and energetic KLR, really. It's like the Rolls Royce of KLRs. My final thoughts: they're good. Very peppy engine for a single. Fantastic big 23 litre tank. Suspension's quite good if you're not into hardcore off-road riding. Suspension's quite good out the box. Wind protection is more than sufficient. Seating position, the bars aren't too bad. I might raise them up a little bit if I was going to own this bike. Get fairly off-road orientated tyres on this, which is a nice change. Yeah, so cons. First one that comes to mind is the seat. I'd want a much more comfortable seat, or some kind of air hawk or something. Second one is they do tend to go through cush drives fairly quickly. If you don't know what a cush drive is, or maybe I'll put up a link somewhere here for you. And I have heard people, even though I said the suspension's good, some people have complained that it's less than adequate when the going gets tough off-road. But as I said, you're on a 200 plus kilo bike. So that has been the review of the Yamaha 660Z Tenere. Fantastic little bike. Well, not very little, but fantastic bike. Thanks for watching, guys. It's been Chronicles of Solid as always, and I will see you in the next video. Catch you later.